Long before the English arrived, Arawak and later Kalinago peoples lived on the island, fishing, hunting, canoe repairing, and complaining about sand getting everywhere. Then around the 1600s, the island was mysteriously abandoned. Barbados was originally known as Ichiruganaim, the name given by the indigenous Arawak people. In the early 1500s, Spanish and Portuguese raiders began making violent slave raids on the island, capturing its inhabitants or forcing them to flee to safer islands. These European explorers later renamed the island Los Barbudos, or Os Barbados, meaning the bearded ones, likely referring to the island's bearded fig trees. By the time the English arrived, the original population had been wiped out or displaced. Barbados is a limestone island, meaning no rivers, no lakes, no fresh springs at sea level, no wells dug yet, rainwater was unpredictable, settlers relied on rivers for farming, freshwater streams for drinking, water sources for settlements. Barbados was not ideal. Maybe hurricanes, maybe war, or maybe everyone simply said, you know what, this place is too much work, let's go. Barbados sits slightly off to the side of the Caribbean chain, yet somehow ends up in the middle of every major Caribbean story. If it were any closer to St. Vincent or St. Lucia, it might start charging them rent. Columbus didn't discover every Caribbean island. Barbados was one of the few smart enough to let him miss it on purpose. The island probably peeked over the horizon and whispered, "Not today." Two English brothers, Captain John Powell and Captain Henry Powell, would play two very different roles in the island's fate. John Powell arrived first in 1625, blown off course on his way home from Brazil. He planted a cross, claimed the island for King James I, left a tiny group of men with supplies, and when he came back 2 years later, only one of those men was still alive. No freshwater, no tools, no real survival skills. The island was paradise to look at, but deadly to live on. But the real beginning came in 1627, when John's brother, Captain Henry Powell, arrived with a full expedition. Around 80 settlers, white indentured servants, a small group of enslaved Africans, livestock, tools, and seeds. This would become the first permanent English colony in Barbados. Because the island was empty, the English couldn't enslave indigenous people, so they relied on white indentured servants, Irish deportees, English poor, Scottish prisoners, anyone whose life England wanted to improve by sending them far away. Contracts were 4 to 7 years long and came with a free bonus package: brutal work, starvation, and high chance of rebellion. To provide context, Europe had been enslaving Europeans for centuries, with Slavic peoples as a major source. The word slave comes from Slav. In 1102, the Council of Westminster banned selling English people as slaves, but this applied only to English subjects and did not stop English involvement in the broader slave trade. By the 1200s to the 1300s, indentured servitude replaced the last remnants of English slavery. By the 1300s, slavery in England faded, but indentured servitude did not. Barbados, of course, turned it up to 10. White servants sued masters, protested, refused work, and threatened each other with, "Wait till I get back to England." Planters quickly realized this workforce is too small, too expensive, and way too mouthy. In the early 1630s, English planters began importing Africans in small batches. Reasons: tobacco and cotton plantations needed labor. White servants were dying or rebelling. Africans were more experienced in tropical agriculture. Barbados was still small-scale farming, but African numbers were increasing. Planters observed indentured Europeans would never supply the labor Barbados needed, and this was before the sugar boom. Africans were seen as the solution because they already had tropical farming skills. They were bought outright, not contracted. They didn't get land after service. Colonial rulers believed they would be easier to control. Early African arrivals in the 1630s weren't always enslaved for life. Some were indentured, some became free, some even owned land. Unlike the the Portuguese slave system where chattel slavery was already in full swing. The English hadn't yet invented their complete list of horrible ideas, but planters noticed one thing. Africans had no legal protections in English law. So in 1636, Barbados created a short but catastrophic rule. Negroes are to serve for life unless a contract states otherwise. Translation: we're about to ruin everything. It was the first step toward racial, hereditary slavery in English law, an attempt to copy the Portuguese slave systems in Brazil and São Tomé. In 1640s, Barbados issued the Servants' Law, protection from being killed or maimed, whipping allowed, murder illegal, right to complain to a magistrate about abuse or unpaid dues, right to basic food, clothing, and shelter provided by the master, right to no illegal contract extensions, only courts could add years. Planters were forcing reproductions or pregnancies on the female servants to extend their time, right to freedom dues at the end of service, clothes, tools, small money, right to be freed when their contract ended, not lifetime, right to marry with master's permission, no right to marry freely, right not to be sold off island without cause, often ignored. England developed an addiction to sugar and needed a supplier. Barbados stepped up. In the 1640s, Barbados switched from tobacco to sugarcane after Portuguese Jews fleeing Brazil introduced advanced sugar-making techniques. Sugar changed everything: massive plantations, wealthy planters, importation of tens of thousands of enslaved Africans. Barbados became the richest English colony in the 1600s and the blueprint for plantation slavery across the Caribbean. And Barbados instantly transformed into plantation heaven, worker hell, and the hottest real estate in the English Empire. Because of Atlantic currents, Barbados became the first stop for slave ships, a human distribution hub. Overnight, labor demands exploded. White servants kept getting injured and some dying. The workload was impossible and unrelentless. Planners wanted predictable labor, and evil never misses a business opportunity. While the planters slept, the indentured servants quietly joined forces with the Africans and began plotting an uprising. In 1649, between 200 and 400 white servants and enslaved Africans united in an uprising. They burned fields, attacked overseers, escaped, refused work. Basically, everything planters prayed wouldn't happen. The 1649 Indentured Servants Uprising united Irish and African slaves against barbaric conditions on the sugar plantations of Barbados and nearby islands colonized by the English plantation owners. The English enslaved Native Americans, deported convicts and prostitutes, and workers from other European countries. Workers revolted with arson, escapes, refusal to work, and murder. They joined forces together regardless of their nationality or skin color. This uprising was a colonial echo of the English Civil War from 1642 to 1651, driven by the same political factions, resentments, and prison transports that the war created. The revolt was crushed. Hangings, whippings, banishments, but the message was clear. Planters responded by creating stricter racial divisions to keep the laborers from ever uniting again. The landowners couldn't tolerate this unity. This alliance terrified plantation owners so badly they invented racial division on purpose. White equals servant with rights, African equals slave with none. They starved the African slaves, forcing them to steal from poor whites, which generated fear and hostility. They even hired poor whites to police Africans. Classic divide and conquer. This model spread to other plantations and colonies and tripled sugar production. Before racial divisions were created, people were divided by class, poor versus wealthy, not white versus black. After this revolt, most white indentured servants eventually left Barbados for St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua, Montserrat, Jamaica, Virginia, and the Carolinas. Most white servants eventually fled Barbados for other islands, leaving behind a small, poor white population known as the Redlegs, who stayed because honestly, nobody knows why. Many white families across the Caribbean and British colonies originally came from early Barbados. In the same year of 1649, England froze as King Charles I was beheaded, the monarchy cut down with one brutal stroke. From the stunned silence emerged Oliver Cromwell, a hard-eyed, grim, unblinking, iron-willed commander whose very presence seemed to darken the air. He spoke little, but his silence carried more threat than any shout. Under his shadow, England braced itself, knowing the king's death had unleashed a far more relentless force. Cromwell saw Barbados as a royalist stronghold, unstable, and way too important to ignore. This helped launch his Western design, which included invading Barbados 1651 to 1652 and seizing Jamaica 1655. Cromwell also shipped thousands of Irish and Scottish prisoners to Barbados because when in doubt, export your problems. In the 1660s to 1670s, wealthy white sugar planters from Barbados migrated to Carolina because Barbados was overcrowded, land was scarce, sugar profits were going to a small elite. Young white men had no plantations to inherit, so they moved to Carolina to build a new Barbados on fresh land. Barbadians became the largest group of early Carolina colonists. Many enslaved people in early South Carolina spoke Caribbean Creole, not African American English yet. The Gullah Geechee world also has a Barbados link, though their African roots were even stronger. In 1650s to 1660s, as sugar expanded, labor demand skyrocketed. Planters needed cheap, permanent, controllable labor. White indentured servants became too few, too expensive, and too rebellious, especially during Cromwell's era. So planters turned heavily toward African labor. Africans soon outnumbered whites 10 to 1, a rapidly growing enslaved African population. Massive wealth tied to sugarcane. Planters lived in fear of rebellion. A revolt could wipe out the entire ruling class overnight. Slavery hardened into a fully racial system. Solution? Create extreme violent laws to control enslaved people, suppress resistance, keep the planter class safe. This fear was the foundation of the code. The 1661 Barbados Slave Code declared Africans equals property. Slave children inherit enslaved status. Masters cannot be punished for killing an enslaved person. Drums, gatherings, literacy ban, punishments, cut ears, cut hamstrings, brandings, whippings, burnings, beheadings, the works. Because the code gave complete legal immunity to enslavers, the following became standard after rebellions: hanging, burning, mutilation, beheading, whipping to death, public displays of bodies, mass executions, trial without evidence, and torture in interrogation, all rooted in the fact that the 1661 code removed enslaved people from human legal protection. Barbados didn't invent slavery, but it systematized it. Its code became the prototype for Jamaica, South Carolina, and much of the British Empire. The 1661 Barbados Slave Code was so harsh, other colonies said, "Wow, let's copy it." Enslaved Bajans kept resisting. 1675 Slave Conspiracy and exposed. Dozens executed. 1692 Plot. Akan, Igbo, others planning united action. 1736 to 1737 plots inspired by Antigua. Somehow plots kept getting discovered before they began. 1701 Poison Scare. Planters panicked because enslaved people controlled all the cooking. 1760s to 1780s Obeah trials, a whole witch hunt era. Planters feared African knowledge of plants more than hurricanes, and that's a lot. Meanwhile, in England in 1772, James Somerset, an enslaved African in England, sued for his freedom and won. James Somerset was an African man enslaved in Virginia and brought to England in 1769 by his enslaver Charles Stuart, a customs official. While in England, Somerset escaped with the help of free black Londoners and abolitionist allies, but he was recaptured in 1771 and placed on a ship bound for Jamaica, where he was to be sold. In England, the Somerset case 1772 ruled slavery unsupported by common law in England, inspiring abolitionists and annoying slave owners. Slavery has been banned in England since 1102. After pressure and rebellions, Britain banned the Atlantic slave trade in 1807. Planters panicked, but Barbados, with high death rates, desperately needed labor. Since new Africans could no longer be imported, planters turned to forced reproduction, pairing enslaved men and women like livestock, punishing miscarriages and exploiting women. Some pairings were strategic. Here are the most common types of forced pairings. A. Strong man and fertile woman to produce strong children for field labor. B. Healthy woman and docile man for children who would be easy to manage. C. Skilled man and skilled woman to produce children who might become domestics, carpenters, or artisans. D. High survival women. Women who had successfully carried babies to term were pushed to have more. Forced reproduction existed across the Caribbean after 1807, but Barbados is unique because its huge population density, lower child mortality, and lack of free land allowed it to sustain the plantation labor force internally, something most other islands failed to do. Unlike Trinidad or Guyana, Barbados did not import Indian or Chinese labor in large numbers and instead forced its population to reproduce internally. Barbados had the harshest labor system in the British Caribbean. No mountains to hide in, no maroons, no escape. Bussa, an African-born ranger head driver, became the perfect organizer. A driver, also called a ranger or head driver, was a plantation leadership role. Not someone operating a wagon or cart. He was driving the labor force, meaning he supervised other enslaved workers, ensured field tasks were completed, relayed orders, and kept track of plantation routines. His authority let him move freely between plantations, gather intelligence, and coordinate leaders. He organized with Nani Grigg, Mastermind and Messenger, Washington Franklin, Jackie the driver, leaders across St. Philip, Christchurch, St. George. Rumors spread that Britain had sent freedom, but planters hid it. Bayesian said, "If freedom reach, we going for it." In Easter 1816, 20,000 enslaved people rose up, burning over 100 plantations. Fire was their main weapon, cheap, effective, and terrifying. The British soldiers were prepared. The revolt was crushed. 300 to 400 enslaved killed, only 2 whites died. Bussa was killed early. Mass executions followed. Punishments included group hangings, beheading, burning, fatal whippings, and torture during interrogations. Though short, the rebellion helped push Britain toward emancipation. About 70 rebels were transported to British Honduras, modern Belize, and small batch to Trinidad. Barbados planters didn't want troublesome rebels remaining on the island, but the courts did not feel there was enough evidence to justify hanging all of them. Just when you think things couldn't get any worse, Barbados endured hurricanes 1780-1831, droughts, famine, each disaster killing thousands, and Barbados rebuilt every time. Finally, after centuries of struggle, slavery ended in 1834, followed by apprenticeship, which was basically slavery with paperwork. Full freedom came in 1838. Education became the new superpower. Leaders like Samuel Jackson Prescott, first non-white legislator 1843, known as the champion of the people, he broke the political color barrier just 5 years after emancipation, fought for free education, fair taxes, civil rights, and land access. The 1869 Barbados protests were about protecting Barbados' political rights and refusing a forced British plan to merge the island with others. In 1937, Barbados was boiling under low wages and hard living. Then came Clement Payne, and Trinidad born to Barbadian parents, urging workers to stand up and preaching discipline and non-violence with his famous message, "Educate, agitate, but do not violate." The crowds listened, until the authorities declared him a threat and deported him on a technicality. The moment Payne was taken away, Barbados exploded. People who had stayed peaceful suddenly said, "Well, if Payne gone, gloves off, and stones started flying at the police like the whole island turned into fast bowlers. Police retaliated with bullets. The riots that followed shook Barbados and pushed the island toward major reforms. Payne died young at age 37 years old, but he died an hero. The 1937 Uprising changed Barbados forever. Grantley Adams was the first premier and expanded rights. On November 30th, 1966, Errol Barrow led Barbados to independence. He is often referred to as the father of independence in Barbados. And after centuries of hurricanes, rebellion, sugar, politics, and enough colonial paperwork to fill the Atlantic, Barbados made one more historic step. Barbados left the monarchy on November 30th, 2021, led politically by Prime Minister Mia Mottley, with Dame Sandra Mason becoming the country's first president. It took 396 years, but Barbados finally returned the monarchy's keys and said, "Thank you for visiting. We'll lock up from here." Barbados remains in the Commonwealth, still friends, just no longer roommates. In 1649, Barbados loses King Charles I. In 2021, Barbados loses another King Charles III. Barbados, what can I say? We're allergic to kings and Charleses. Today, Barbados is one of the Caribbean's most digitally organized nations, turning the birthplace of no reading aloud into the land of try fail if you bold. Barbados evolved into the most educated Caribbean society, producing doctors, engineers, scholars, and skillful tradesmen. From abandoned villages, to sugar fortunes, to rebellions, hurricanes, and emancipation. Barbados survived everything history threw at it, and still had time to invent good macaroni pie. A small island with a huge story. A people shaped by storms, strengthened by struggle, and always able to laugh. Barbados forever forward.